I'm a biomechanist by training. That's my science. And so I organize things more by the shapes that you are in and the efforts that you are in. Because a big issue with only looking at the cardio, strength training, flexibility is it doesn't help someone really drill down. For example, if you take someone who has a labor-intensive job or a sport, those are both groups that labor quite a bit, that you tend to use the same body parts and the same shapes over and over again. And that's where you get into trouble. That's where you're getting into trouble, is using the same shapes. So I have categories of a movement diet. So if you imagine a food pyramid, we can argue about what's on the food pyramid. But if you imagine the food pyramid that comes out from the government, the shape of the pyramid is not really, you can't argue about that. What you need more of is on the bottom, and what you need a little bit of is on the top.
Perfect.
So when we look at human beings that have got really good cardiovascular mobility and functional strength markers, you're looking at hunter-gatherer population. So I always use an evolutionary lens for my work.
I love
so
it.
The base of even modern hunter-gatherers now is a lot of active rest positioning. So while we are sedentary, it's actually quite natural to be resting and sitting quite a bit of the day. But we tend to do all of our rest in a chair. So that chair is one particular shape. You know, your hips are at one particular position, your knees are at one position. And if you looked at all the hours that you sit, you're going to find that whether you're in your car or in your occupation chair or your home chairs, the shape is almost identical. So a big problem for almost everybody is a very large portion in one single shape. And unfortunately, that one particular shape loads the knees and the lower spine and the pelvis and the pelvic floor and the lower back and the upper back in a particular way.
Interesting.
And so there's nothing really wrong with the sitting position, but it's just like the massive amounts that we're doing it. So when you're resting, when you are in place, I'm not really resting right now, but part of my work is doing this podcast. So I'm doing it standing.
Yeah.
And so I'm getting a different set of movement nutrients than when I was driving over here in my car to my office to be able to do it. I'm trying to find more places to add different shapes to my in-place tasks. Whether it's watching TV at the end of the day, you could be just sitting on the ground with your legs crossed, all these things that look like maybe you would go to a class to learn how to stretch your hips, or you would take yoga to keep your lower back and legs more flexible, and you do it for that 1 hour, but it wouldn't occur to you to kind of use those shapes in your own home while you're watching TV at night.
Right.
Or, if you're checking emails.
Okay, so when I'm thinking through the lens of shapes, I love this, by the way, and I love looking at everything through hunter-gatherer primal. That's all my teachings have been like. I always go back to, well, how did they do it in the hunter and gatherer days?
Yeah.
So I love that we're having that aspect of this conversation. But I see 3 shapes in my life that I can pretty much guess. There's the standing up version of me, there's the sitting down version of me, and there's the laying down version of me. So what I'm hearing you say is that I've limited the shapes of me, and that diversity of shapes is going. So if I'm watching TV, could I do it sitting in a squat or sitting on the ground with my legs forward? Like, is that what you're meaning about let's expand our shapes of how our bodies are living on a daily basis?
Exactly. And so there's the shape and then there's the effort in the shape. But for this base of the pyramid, active rest positioning is a big shape. And so there's, as you said, sitting with your legs out in front of you, or your legs wide, or your legs crossed, or your legs to one side. You can be up on a pillow. You could be on a low stool, even if you perched on a low stool, standing. There's lots of different ways. So if you can play around with that big base, you'll be breaking up. What you said kind of made me laugh, because there was this book I loved when I was a kid. It was a mystery book, but some guy always talked in riddles, and they're like, what's your position on this? And he said, well, it's standing or sitting when not lying down. And that's what it reminded me of. And we are sort of always thinking of those as our options. But right above that base layer of active rest positioning, which again, isn't addressing heart and lung movement, it doesn't really take more energy, physical energy. It's just making a different choice. Right above that on the pyramid is walking. Walking is another very large pyramid amount of movement that we need. That would be another way of looking at your movement diet. I'm like, am I getting enough walking? So that 3 to 5 mile a day, and it doesn't have to be speed walking.
Okay.
You know, it could be, it's not fitness walking. It doesn't only have to be fitness walking because it's called upright locomotion. You've got reciprocal arm swing. You've got legs going back and forth, which really helps the pelvis and the pelvic floor and the hip joints stay supple.
Okay.
So there's that. Then there's carrying, you know, being able to carry a load in our arms.
When you're walking.
Well, yes. I mean, if you could, sometimes when you have young kids, you do a lot of carrying, even if you're not, you know, you're cooking and you're holding.
Yeah.
So it doesn't all exclusively have to be that, but really outside of that period of time, unless your occupation is carrying heavy, you know, if you're a farmer, a lot more carrying in that,
Right.
or, you know, moving loads around. And then there's making movements. Making movements can be knitting. They can be deep cleaning, anything sort of repetitive that you're using your hands for, working in the garden, tool use, woodworking. We don't really give our hands very much attention. And we are really seeing a decline in hand strength just with the introduction of handheld stuff.
And my brain's going crazy now.